why don't we kick it off?
Let's jump right
You
in.
want to hit that?
I'll
Yeah,
hit it. Let's do it.
Hit it. So really quickly, in the registration, you saw the questions we asked about how experienced are you with CRO and what's your biggest CRO challenge. We wanted to really make this as finely tuned and as relevant as possible. So with that in mind, a lot of you told us you are at the intermediate to advanced level. That is fantastic. What we've got for you today is, as you know, I'll talk a little bit about how this came together. The awesome post that Brian did for the conversion rate optimization, the complete list, was really the foundation for this idea. There's so much good stuff there, and if you haven't checked it out, the link is on the page. We'll send it to you afterwards. It's on backlinko.com. There are so many great resources, case studies, tools, and everything else there that, you know, I said to Brian, look, this is such a great resource, but even I'm getting a little overwhelmed trying to wade through it all. Let's see if we can just take, you know, the top 5 to 10 concepts and ideas and some of our favorite case studies out of it and put those together in a way that we can discuss those with people, get some questions and feedback, and really go over what we love about it. So we put that together, and I think you're really going to like it. Brian's going to tell you a little bit about what questions we're going to try and answer and how we're going to help you get to some of the best of that great list.
Yep, so basically what happened was when Hunter gave me this idea that we could do the webinar based on the guide that I developed, I thought it was a great idea, but Hunter brought up a great point that, you know, when we put together like a top 10 techniques from the list, top 10 to one person isn't going to be top 10 to somebody else, right? And because from our survey, or when you signed up, we learned that you're intermediate and advanced CRO specialist, and not just, you know, your run-of-the-mill person is just trying to eke out a couple extra conversions. You live, eat, sleep, and breathe conversions. These are things that you wonder. You know, how can I start, what can I start doing right away to start getting more conversions? So you don't want to wait around for split tests. So what can you do that maybe will work right away? And how can I get other people who aren't conversion professionals to start to do this stuff? How to create blog content that converts? How can I come up with ideas for A/B tests? And how can I convert more of my traffic to leads and sales? And we're going to cover all of that today, including case studies, step-by-step processes, everything you need to know to help you answer all of those questions. But first, let's take 1 second to introduce ourselves. First, we have Hunter, who is, of course, the founder of Optimization Copilot, and he's the co-presenter with me today. And, you know, Hunter's someone who's known for growth because he's been producing triple-digit gains online since the .com days, since back in the day. And he actually led business development at AWeber, and he was online marketing at 1-800-Hotels and Marketing Experience. And basically, since 2008, when he's not doing all that stuff, he's flying everywhere, teaching people conversion rate optimization at events around the world. And he also likes to ride massive kangaroos once in a while when he has a chance.
Kangaroo Wrangler. That's it. I got to add that in the title.
Yeah, you're missing that.
Thank you for that, Brian. And you know what? It doesn't make me feel old at all. I feel pretty good about the .com days. As probably most of you know, if you haven't seen the site backlinko.com yet, it's one that I highly recommend. Brian's been doing a kick-ass job for a long time with SEO, with audience building, and his blog I particularly like. You know, I worked with a lot of very, very well-known people in the digital marketing space over the years, and especially with AWeber, and I got to really like Brian's blog because the practical information and the posts that he puts together have this level of transparency and level of actionability that made him like the perfect choice for when I saw that this list, the complete list came out. It was exactly one of the things that I had in mind that I was developing. So I said, screw that, let's just do what Brian's already done, and we'll just get things together, and you know, we're going to kick it out today. So thanks for joining us. Let's dive right in and jump into what we're going to cover. What do you think?
Sounds good. Sounds good. The only thing I'm not so happy about is that you killed me in the picture department. You killed me in the picture department. I don't have a kangaroo. I don't have any help. I just got a wall. I have a wall. That's my prop. You're riding a kangaroo, waving a hat around. My prop is literally a white wall. I need to work on that. I feel a little bit defeated. We just got started. You already beat me. So this is the guide that Hunter was talking about, conversion optimization techniques, the complete list. Obviously, you're free to check it out. It'll be there, so there's no rush to check it out now because we're basically going to give you the best bits from it right now, and then you can check out the rest later on. So let's just jump into technique number 1 from the list. Sound good?
Perfect. One of my favorites that Brian covered, and he did a great job in the post, we'll look at a couple of the highlights from that, is using the weird, quote-unquote, type of button copy on your calls to action, right? So show me is a little bit different than the norm. If you look at what Noah Kagan and some of the folks who are using the Sumo Me pop-up and other kinds of tools, you know, we're used to seeing a lot of buttons like subscribe now, join now, buy now, register now, and now is a very important modifier. We ran a test today, Weber, where now had an almost 13% increase in the conversion rate on just one of those buttons. But I don't always love to recommend using button colors and copy tests and things like that as the be-all, end-all of conversion, because it's very easy to get excited about those types of gains. However, if you're really looking for kind of a low-friction way to get started with different types of tests, let's say that you're, you don't have a whole lot of design leeway or development bandwidth, and you're just trying to find some ways to really get CRO up and running, either individually or with the department, this is a perfect way to start. So you can change 1 or 2 words on your button copy and take things like these kind of generic subscribe now, buy nows, and maybe change them into some of the more creative versions or the quote-unquote weird type versions that we're looking at here. If we flip to the next screen, we'll see, here's a great example. I'm in, and I believe I've seen that one before somewhere. I think the website looks pretty familiar.
Backlinko.com, I think.
I think you're right. And if you think about some other ones, again, there are some that I've seen from Sumo Me that use Gimme. There's one here in the test that Brian put into the blog post where try schedulicity free. You know, it's very similar to the buy now. It's a pretty straightforward approach versus this end my scheduling hassles, which is a very benefit-oriented one. It's a very what's in it for me. Got them a 24% lift. So there are lots of different examples, lots of ways that you can go with that, lots of ideas to kind of create. But if you're trying to figure out a way to really get some inroads to some button and some call to action testing, weird copy versus some of those standard versions or the generic versions is a great way to go.
Yeah, I like that, Hunter. And I like the fact that I think a mistake a lot of people make with button copy is that they test 2 different generic button copies against each other. And that's the point of this one. Like, you've heard of testing different copy, but when you do something like end my scheduling hassles, first of all, it speaks to that person what they're thinking, right? They have some issues with scheduling, and it's just a great call to action. But also it stands out. And that's what you want with your buttons, right? You make it red, you make it orange, you make it yellow so people see it, but then the text is something boring like subscribe, and it blends in. But when you have something like that, it's just another way for your button to stand out.
Boom.
So that's it. Yeah. So that's it for technique number 1. So technique number 2 is the content upgrade. So just let me know. I'm going to pop open the questions tab for a second. Has anyone heard of the content upgrade before? Let me know in the questions. No. Yeah. Okay. No. Oh. Wow. Okay. Well, Andy has, but most people have not. Michael says, of course. Jason says, yep. So we have a kind of a mix here. So whether you've heard of the content upgrade or not, I'm going to show you some data that'll be really interesting and that you can potentially use to get more subscribers. So if you are interested in turning content into subscribers, this is probably the #1 strategy that I recommend because it's literally changed my business. So about last year or a year and a half ago, I published this post called Google's 200 Ranking Factors to Complete List. And not unlike this conversion guide, it was this huge guide. And because it was really popular and it did well, and it ranks for a lot of keywords, it brings in a ton of traffic. And it was bringing in almost 15,000 unique visitors a month, this one post, which is obviously a lot. The problem was it was the #1 in terms of traffic on my site, but it was the worst in terms of conversions. It was 0.39%, even for a blog, which, you know, as you guys know, doesn't convert very well in terms of turning random organic visitors or Twitter traffic into leads. This is really bad even for a blog. And after I used the content upgrade, this is literally what happened to the conversion rate. It went from 0.39% to 5.4%, literally overnight. So here's how I did it. So the first thing I did was look at this piece of content through the eyes of someone that's reading it for the first time and think, what is it about this content that is missing, that could make it a little bit better? So I was getting comments from people saying, this is just too much information. There's 200 ranking factors here. I don't have time to go through them all. Other people are saying you need to turn it into a PDF so I can save it on my desktop and read it on a plane or something like that. So that's what I did. I created a checklist that basically helped those two things. So I created a checklist of the 10, so just those things that people needed to know, and I created a PDF so people could take it with them. And I added it to the post. So instead of adding it to the post for free or adding that feature to my post, I pitched it in exchange for an email. So I added a lead pages box, I called a lead box at the top of the post, and another call to action at the bottom. And whenever someone clicks on that, a lead box appears, and when they enter the email, they get their PDF. Now, to put this in perspective of how effective this is, because each subscriber to my business is worth about $12 because I sell premium online training products, just since I instituted the content upgrade, it brought in pretty much, let's say 3,600 subscribers to round it out, which is $43,000 in revenue from this one strategy, this one checklist. And if you look at the cost, which is pretty much nothing, it cost me about $300 a year for lead pages and $90 for design. So the ROI is obviously insane, plus my time to make the checklist, which is actually not that hard because all the stuff is already in the post. So the profit is almost 100%. And since I rolled this out to my entire site, so I tested in this post and then rolled it out to the entire site, my conversion rate went up by 180% in 6 weeks using this one strategy. You can see that my total site-wide conversion rate went from about 1% to almost 3.5% with this one strategy. So with that, turn it back over to Hunter.
Man, that's brilliant. I just want to say one thing on that. It is one of my favorite case studies, and I know that Brian had great success with it. I know other people as well who've been using the content upgrade that are having crazy results with that. We got a lot of people who answered in questions that they hadn't heard of it. This is one area, if you're really using a blog as a core to your content strategy, that I cannot recommend more strongly testing out. If you haven't heard about it before, when you get this recording or get the slides afterwards, or check out the post itself, make sure that this is something that you do. With the new blog that I'm launching for Optimization Copilot, this is one of the first things I'm putting into place. And it's also the reason Brian is buying us all a drink after the webinar here today, virtual drink, because
yeah, it's a lot.
Post all that mad money that he's got on there. Sweet, that is a great one. So let's jump right back into sort of the calls to action. So this is kind of an extension of number one as well. We'll just do a quick run around here for this one. Testing first and second person versions of your call to actions. So if we flip to the next slide, and you can see how we have the kind of two versions that we often go with. One is, you know, the I want the free report, the kind of me, or the yes, I'd like to, etc., versus the get your free report. This is an area that marketers are trying to figure out and test, you know, on a fairly regular basis, but a lot of times we either get stuck in one version or another. I find it's been very hard working with a lot of different clients, and even myself, when you get into kind of a mode with your copy, it's really hard to flip that around sometimes and test some of those variations. And first person versus the other version is one of the tricky ones. So we'll look at this case study here that my buddy Mike Agard had done with Content Verve. This was one of the cases that they covered for the site RightWork. And you can see that initial control version was a create my account, right? This is very standard on a lot of SaaS sites, on a lot of different membership type platforms, things like that. The test version of the button that they put on there was create account and get started, right? So moving from that first person to that third person version. And what you'll find is, actually, you know what, before we go to the results, I want to take a quick audience temperature check and see which one of those you think actually won. Do you think that the control, the create my account, beat out the test version, the create account and get started, or do you think the test version actually won? Because this is kind of an interesting case. Just put A or B in there. Get started, okay, I like it. Someone's going for, Hannah's going for version B. A lot of people are going for version B. We got someone who likes control. Okay. I like the way you're going there, Andy. Going against the grain. Okay, nice. A lot of people are going for B. A lot of people are really, I think, getting the point of where we're going with this. It was kind of a leading the witness question. But let's take a quick look at the results that they got from that version. The create account and get started was actually accountable for a 31% increase in conversions. And this is one of my favorite kind of quotes and things to keep in mind. If we think about this test and we think about the different variations for the first person, this is a quote from Agard, and I made sure that we put this version of the picture in instead of, I've seen his headshot all over the place, and a lot of you guys don't know how goofy he can really get. So his quote here, the first person possessive determiner my can increase friction, and if you think about it, it's an easy to understand option why that is, right? In his experience, he suggests it's better to address your potential customers with your or completely leave it out. So I'm one that is always wary of hard and fast rules, but I know that he's done a lot of testing with this. This one test is still something that I kind of think about as your mileage may vary, but if you are looking for a way, again, to think about button copy or to think about calls to action and where and how to focus an idea to test, that weird copy that we talked about before is one way, and this concept of the voice, in the driver's seat, first person versus create my account, is a great idea for using a test in that area.
Good stuff. Yeah, and it's something that couldn't be easier to test because you may have one or the other already, just a matter of swapping out my for your. And you can see if it makes a difference. In his case, it was insane how much of a difference it made. Now, of course, there's some confounding variables there. The button was a little bit bigger, and there was extra copy. But a big part of it, the change, was the change in from my to your. So if you're looking for something easy, you don't need a lot of buy-in to get this done.
Oh.
Okay, so let's just move on to technique number 4. How does that sound?
Let's do it.
This is one of my favorites.
How are we doing on pacing, everybody? Is this moving along pretty good? I think we're doing pretty well with tracking.
Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious over here. That's how we got to be. These are professionals we're dealing with. You know what I mean? If this was a webinar of people who didn't know what CRO stood for, we may have to slow things down. But it's Fast and Furious. And this is going to be a recording. So if you miss something, you can always go back.
It is, and we're trying to save a little question and answer time here for the end. So we're trying to squeeze it all in. We're keeping an eye on questions. We'll get to those, so good. We're saying people are telling us pace is good.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to questions. All right, so counter, this is one of my favorites. Let's just say if I had one of my favorites, this is great. It's something that not a lot of people do for obvious reasons. It makes logical sense that if you have someone come into your site that wants to buy something or become a lead and think, I'm going to but this thing, you don't want to object to that because maybe there's someone else who wouldn't even enter their mind, and just the fact of bringing it up would prevent them from signing up. But as we'll see in a second with a great case study, this isn't always the case, and sometimes it's best to just be straight up with people and be like, look, here's the deal. I kind of almost like take it or leave it, but you're positioning it in a way that counters that talks to the conversation that's already in their mind. You really want to don't be afraid to put this stuff on your site and then directly counter it. So you don't just want to put it on your site and be like, look, we charge for shipping, and explain that you charge for shipping. You want to actually say, here's why we charge for shipping. It actually saves you money in the long term, or we ship it faster or better or safer, whatever it is. Now, but what do you put on your site? This is actually the big question, because you can put all sorts of stuff about why people shouldn't buy it, but if it doesn't actually speak to that person, you are going to hurt your conversions a lot. So these are the big 4, as I see it. Real reasons that people say, I'm this close to doing that thing, this close to hitting that checkout button, this close from entering my phone number, but it's just something that is stopping me. And the number 1 is, will this work for me? That's kind of like 1 and 3 on this list as a combo, because everyone thinks, okay, these testimonials are great, your social proof is great, but will this work for me in my unique situation? And then there's a credibility. Why should I believe you? And that's where you can you don't have to address that. You can actually just put credibility indicators on your site and you address it that way, or it's not worth the money. So I've seen this a lot with high-priced information products. A lot of times people just say, oh, it's a great value and all that, which a lot of times it can be. But I've also seen a lot of smart marketers say, hey, look, this isn't cheap. this isn't some ebook, but it's worth it because of X, Y, and Z. So that's another way. That's a huge barrier for a lot of people for higher price stuff, and it's up to you to directly counter that and say, look, this isn't cheap, you're right, and here's why it's worth the money. So let's just look at a really interesting case study of this in action from sunshine.co.uk, and this was on the CRO blog. And basically, what makes sunshine.co.uk a little bit different than a lot of other sites in the UK where you book a trip is that they don't have a phone number. And they have a lot of older people that want to book their cruise and get their tan and all that stuff, but they want to call and make sure that maybe they have a question about the date or what the kind of food they're going to serve. And it's very common for you to call them up before you book something like this, and they didn't have a phone number. So instead of hiding that fact, they actually put prominently where a phone number is usually listed on a website, where's a phone number? Because they kept getting that question over and over again, and it was preventing people from booking. Now when you click on that, a box appears that literally says, why don't we show a phone number? Because we want to give you the lowest prices and we pass these savings on to you. This is probably the best example of countering objections that I've ever seen, because it is an objection for a lot of people that visit their particular website, and they direct it with something that actually it makes it sound like a unique selling proposition that they don't have a phone number. So that's all there is to countering objections.
That is awesome. I want to say just one thing on that as well, and this is something that Marcus Sheridan talks about a lot. And you can think about this beyond conversion optimization. You can think about it for your content strategy as well. One of the things I really love that he talks about is not being afraid to address the objections that are in your prospects and customers' minds. You know, we think a lot of times that if we don't talk about them, people won't think about them. And thinking about the psychology of the user or the visitor or the buyer that way can lead us into kind of risky areas where, you know, we don't give them credit for thinking about, they're not thinking about our products or services or what we're doing in our business from our marketing perspective. They're thinking about it from a customer perspective. You're not fooling anybody. 60% of online sales research is already done before people even reach out to you for an info request most of the time now. So Brian makes a great point about using those types of objections as something to handle directly and to really, you know, to address in a very upfront, straightforward manner. So if you're doing that on landing pages, great. If you're doing that on blogs, if you're doing that on different types of areas with frequently asked questions or wherever you're doing it, that's a principle to keep in mind for conversion in an even broader sense than what we're looking at here. So that was a great case, and it's definitely something that I don't think gets quite as much attention as it should. So I love that one especially for those reasons. So let's jump real quick into price anchoring. I think this one's pretty funny. I think this one goes way back to, oh, there he is, man. When they threw you guys know who this is? You know what, never mind. We won't throw that in the questions, Dick. This guy was selling, which one was this for? A blender, a vacuum?
I think this was for the rotisserie. The set it and forget it rotisserie.
Rotisserie. God, that's beautiful.
Set it and forget it. Probably the best slogan ever. Let's just say that.
It's right after Just Do It. But if you think about what Ron Popeil and a lot of the old school copywriters have done, and you know, when we're talking about ghosts and skeletons in the closet, a lot of what I had done years ago was actually from direct mail and copywriting in sort of those transition years. If you think about the value of using price anchoring, not necessarily in this old school way, but if we flip to the new example here that's a little bit fresher, that's maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 years more current, you'll see how Amazon and other sites, you know, SaaS sites, we see a lot of examples of this. This is an area that if you are doing sales with your landing pages, rather than trying to get lead gen and opt-ins and things like that, you can take a few cues from some of the old masters like Popeil and some of the old copywriter folks. You can take your cues from what Amazon is doing. You see that they have 3 or 4 different kind of variations here of pumping up the price. One is crossing out the list price with a strike through. The other one is using the price with red and bold, plus bolding the you save, so it has the actual amount, plus the percentage amount that you save there. And you know, if you think about how many tests Amazon runs, I forget the actual number. Brian Eisenberg has an amazing presentation on this. It will blow your mind how many tests Amazon has run over the years. While I'm not one for just copycatting what's out there on other sites and best practices as far as that versus testing, if you're going to take your lead from a website, you can do a lot worse than Amazon, right? So if we look at how we use price anchoring, and I think we have on the next slide just a quick case study or a test from the massive list. This one I can't even read. This was a great one from the virtual website optimizer blog, and this is, Brian, remind me, this
is a web hosting.
Dutch or Danish?
Danish web hosting.
Right, Danish web host. There you go. I'm more of a kangaroo guy. I don't do the wooden shoes and that sort of thing. So, but while I cannot read this, what we can see when we look at how those different price points were used with the little red circles, we can see the savings version on these. Across the board, this led to a almost 52% lift on reservations across the board. You'll see that source tag down at the bottom for the actual VWO case study for the full information. And once again, all of these cases, I know we're going through these really quickly, but we're just trying to give you the highlights, and the Backlinko post, you can point right to the full case study itself to dig into the details. But this is a really good quick example of how even on a 1, 2, 3 different options page all at once, again, a very common version for SaaS software and things like that, or membership pricing options, you can use price anchoring in that method and get a nice lift either across the board or testing this in individuals if you just have kind of a one price product.
Mm-hmm.
Let's flip along.
Okay. So yeah, that's a good one. Actually, I sell information products online, and even though I don't have a great comparison like Amazon, although who knows where they even get theirs from? You know, where's that original price that they use from, right? They just kind of made it up. I try to find something pretty legitimate that I can compare it to. So if you happen to sell, information products, I like to compare my courses to an offline course. How much would it cost to maybe go to a conference and do a workshop? How much would it cost to take it at university? And by doing that, you enter a different price in their mind that the anchor is usually higher than yours, and then you say, well, you can get the same value and more at this price. So it actually doesn't really matter what you sell. You don't have to sell information products. You can do it with service-based businesses and info products too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with technique number 6, moving right along here, is to use the exact language that customers use. I love this one. I think it's something that that more marketers could do better, to be honest with you. And basically, it's been said, entering the conversation already taking place in your prospect's mind is the goal of good ad copy. So it's not really about writing something snappy and writing something that you think is cool. It really comes down to just entering the conversation in your prospect's mind. And sometimes if you have nerdy people visiting your website, that might not sound cool at all. So if you have some sort of boring IT product, I see a lot of people trying to make it this fascinating thing, make it really cool, but that's not the conversation that's happening in the person's mind, right? They just want their little boring IT problem solved. A great example is one of Hunter's favorite headlines of all time, which is great, by Optimizely. A/B testing that you'll actually use. We're going to dig a bit deeper into this headline a bit later. But for 5 words, you can't do much better than that. And it's one of those headlines, it's almost like a joke. You either get it or you don't. But if you get it, you love it. And if you don't, you're probably not right for the product anyway, so there's a door. Now, how do you find the language to use in this copy that's the conversation in their head? Well, one way is to ask people. This is something I do when someone signs up for my newsletter. The first email they get says, reply to this email and tell me one thing that you're struggling with. And to date, I've received over 4,000 replies to that email. And I just pretty much know my customers, my potential customers, and my readers on my blog better than anyone else online, because I don't know anyone else who's reading all these responses. So when I write copy, a lot of times people say, how'd you know? It's like you read my mind. And a lot of times I just copied and pasted an email from someone that seemed representative of what people were thinking at the time. You can also use Amazon reviews. This is awesome. So here's an example of puppy food. The puppy food actually we saw in the example before. And people actually say things like, I sat on the internet and did a lot of research on puppy and dog food. So, when I was growing up, I had a dog, Winston. We called him Winston the Wonder Dog. And we fed him pretty good food, I thought. We didn't have the internet when I was a kid to look up good food. We just pretty much gave him whatever's on sale. But people today, just like any product, they research, but the way they say it, I sat on the internet and did a lot of research. I decided my dogs would have a better life than that. Think of how emotionally compelling that copy is. That's good stuff that you can use, and people leave stuff like that in reviews all the time. So a lot of times when they leave reviews, they'll say things like, this sucked, or this was great, I love this feature was good. But a lot of times you get something like this, where someone kind of tells a little story about how they went from kind of not knowing what to get to getting this, and they like it. And you can kind of document that customer journey and use actual copy that they use. When people read it, it's going to be one of those moments like, how did they know? You can also use Reddit. A lot of people leave questions on Reddit no matter what industry you're in. If you sell puppy food, there's dog Reddits, subreddits that people ask questions. What kind of puppy food should I use? But they won't just say that. They'll also say things like, I looked everywhere. I went to PetSmart. I went to Walmart. I went to Target, and I couldn't find any. And that's the type of copy that you can use. It's going to be really powerful for people. And the people that don't get it, they don't really matter anyway, right? Because you're only trying to speak to your target customer. And that's why Optimize's headline is so brilliant. If I showed it to my mom, she would have no idea what they're talking about, right? A/B testing actually is, but most entrepreneurs who have tried A/B testing are frustrated because they don't actually use the software. So with that, let's turn it over to Hunter for technique number 7.
Yeah, you have to be careful with Reddit, though. There's a lot of bunny trails and rabbit holes that you can go down there. So if you're going to go that way, just make sure that you stay focused. One last sort of tip for putting those together, and Brian really covered the best parts. When you put together that qualitative information by asking your customers, particularly with a welcome message or an autoresponder series, and you put that together with the quantitative, right? When you're looking at your analytics, when you're looking at some of those search results and some of those other tools, whether you're using BuzzSumo or other kinds of things, putting those two together is the best way to find the real trends that you can capitalize on and hone not just your content, but your overall copy, your design, the thrust of the products that you're doing, right? That kind of user feedback, whether it's Qualaroo, if you're doing products or things like that. Those are going to be the best ways to kind of match the psychological cues that your audience really wants to hear. And if you're using those in the way that helps to really develop and define your products and your services and the way that you position them, that's going to do something that you don't even need testing and CRO testing tools to kind of get those gains. You're just making a stronger product or a stronger service and a stronger connection to your audience through that. It just really lifts all boats across the board. So again, this is one, we talk about this from a CRO perspective, but it's really even more fundamental and foundational than that. So keep that in mind, and using that qualitative and quantitative together by asking is super, super powerful. Awesome. That's great stuff, Brian.
Thank you.
Guiding with directional cues. So here, this one's really self-explanatory, so I'm just going to go through it really quickly. We've seen a lot of case studies over time about, using images where people's eyes point you directly towards, the headline, the form, the action that you want to take. Here's a great example from Chemistry Now. It's got an attractive picture. I don't know if they A/B tested the photo in that one or not, but it's just an example of how you can apply this concept. And I think we have a couple more examples. I'm just going to blow through these real fast because I feel like this is an area that a lot of people are probably familiar with. Salesforce, here you can see that notched arrow that points right over to the action in the first name and helps draw your attention. We're all familiar, I hope we're all familiar on this call with kind of the F pattern, right? Google search results and how people read, how we typically read left to right, top to bottom. This does a really nice job of putting that arrow, that little notch right up top there. So your eye goes from the clouds right to the headline and to that little sales tips, hero shot, and then it sort of goes right over to the notch. You even skip a little bit of that copy. It's very low contrast on that page, but for people who are kind of getting it, want to move right along, depending on the traffic driver, this is something that keeps that flow going. Look at one more quick example, one or two more, I think, on this one, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this one I love because I like Basecamp, but this is a guy with like a freakishly long left arm and like a really tiny T-Rex arm and a clipboard, and he's a lot of fun. But you'll see that using that graphic version, so There are kind of cut design widgets. There are cartoon versions that we can use here. And then the next version that we're going to look at is a logo as well. So you can get really clever with putting your logo into the process and using that directionally, as GiftRocket has done. And, you know, those are just like a ton of fun little things floating around the rocket, I guess, but using that to point the user right at the headline and then the send a gift rocket. These are a couple different examples of different ways you can use design to help use the experience of the page and the design flow to get people further along in the process.
Yep. So, yeah, so speaking of guiding people, the reason that we showed so many examples there, just because you can be really creative with it, and you can be really subtle or really overt, right? You can use the Salesforce directional cue, which couldn't be more subtle if they tried, but it works, right? Or you could be more direct with the creepy Basecamp guy with the long arm pointing to the first form, right? Both work well, and it's a great thing to test, right? You can have the exact same page with two different directional cues and see which one works better. No buy-in really required. Now, hand-drawn visuals are kind of the opposite. They're only one extreme for the most part. They tend to be pretty overt, pretty in your face. Here's a great heat map from back in the day that I've seen a bunch of times. I really love it because it shows you how much hand-drawn visuals grab people's attentions. Because online we're used to seeing things that are really symmetrical, really boxy, right? Everything's very clean looking, and sites should look clean. And then when you have that hand-drawn kind of irregular visual on the page, it really grabs your eye. It kind of looks like someone stole your laptop and scribbled on it and then put it back in front of you. It's really, really eye-catching. Now, look at something like WordStream. This is a very subtle visual cue, right? This is an arrow that you could miss if you weren't looking for it. Like, only CRO nerds really see the arrow. Most people just click the button. And it's really subtle. And again, that's something to test, whether you want to use something really subtle like this or something like a hand-drawn visual cue. On the other hand, if you go to a lot of supplement sites, especially stuff that's going to, you know, get you jacked and get you buff and all the stuff that Hunter is, basically, try to get you to look like Hunter, they tend to have a lot of hand-drawn visual cues, right? Because they're more on the extreme, right? They're very like, and if you sell skateboards or something like that, it could be a great opportunity for you to use these hand-drawn visual cues, and your audience may actually prefer that to something that's so subtle people can't even see it. So that's it.
It's like juice heads using crayons, so it's really relating to the customer in that example, I think is what you're doing there.
Exactly.
Speaking of juice, here we go. We're going into Pope Peel mode again. Not exactly. So we got that blender, right, showing products in context. So Brian set me up for this one, and then look, you know what he did? He went back and he dug into the archives and he found one of my old, I think this next photo, did you get this out of my high school yearbook? I'm not sure.
I had to ask. Yeah, I had to ask around, actually.
Look, so, I mean, this is kind of embarrassing. I gave up smoking many, many years ago, but back in those days, you know, when it was very popular, using that product in context, again, is sort of an example that really gets down to what you're putting on your page, on your site, and how that enters the user's mind with what they're looking for. So, I mean, this is a magazine example, and, you know, I'm not embarrassed to say that those were good days, but if we flip to something a little bit more current, we can look at how the idea of using this type of context is one that IKEA, as one example, does really well on its site. So, you know, again, for a lot of different sites, we've seen, you know, we were talking earlier about call to action buttons and how, you know, buy now and act now and subscribe and, you know, reserve now. We get caught up in kind of the same processes and using a lot of things that we've seen before, kind of reusing visuals. A lot of sites that have, you know, ebooks or courses, you know, that have the kind of standard ebook hero shot, things like that. One thing that for e-commerce really makes a big difference is using these products in context. So if you can do that, this shot here is actually not for the flatware, it's not for the furniture, it's for that silverware drawer, or the drawer insert right there, the wooden product. So think about that versus if they just did, you know, like a little 3D version of it without anything in it, and it looks very much like what you would be used to from an e-commerce site 5, 6 years ago, something like that. using things like, if you're doing crafts, using the photography or the images, the visuals there to show either them being made or kind of a how-to or a DIY, or if you're doing t-shirts, apparel, those sorts of things, putting them on models and in scenes rather than even just kind of a white background. These are great ideas for taking the products that you already use and putting them in context there that helps your audience see how they're going to use it. Flip ahead a little bit. And I think that, it's obviously a little bit trickier for services in some ways, which is where, we wind up seeing a lot of bad stock photography. But, I mean, there are definitely areas that you can try and think of and get creative with to help people see in their minds the visual of the benefits that your product or service is doing. And visuals are super important these days. As we all know, the visual web is getting a lot more attention than, let's say pages and pages of copy and those sorts of things. The attention that you can get in a short amount of time and how you can kind of direct user intent with that is super important. So when you're thinking about visuals, that's one of the keys right there.
Good stuff.
And I think, this was one that I was jumping into in Technique 10, right? For no-nonsense headlines. All right. This is one of my favorites, too, again, because, Brian covered this really well in the blog post with a bunch of different examples. Just to cut to the chase on this one, having written, I don't even know how many, email subject lines, email copy, web pages, all that stuff over the years, and having run a lot of different tests and worked with a lot of people who've run even more, one of the things that just has to be a part of your process is clarity. So at Marketing Experiments, we used to talk about the idea that clarity trumps persuasion. You can find that, and there are tons of examples on that site and others that really cut to the chase on how using clarity versus clever, catchy headlines and things like that are going to win. So we know that there are things like, BuzzFeed and link bait type headlines that obviously get a lot of attention and clicks and things like that, but the bottom line really comes down to three things with a headline. And there are a lot of other factors, obviously, than just three, but if they're gripping, if they're no nonsense, and if they are specific, a lot of times you are going to get better engagement, better pickup, better click-throughs and conversions because you are connecting directly with what the reader wants. You're not making them have to think more about where they're trying to go or where they're at. That's really the whole kind of idea behind clarity trumping persuasion. And so catchy headlines and using words in a really compelling sense doesn't always mean just a dry how-to headline. When I say no nonsense and specific, it's not always about just sort of that bottom line boilerplate, this is what you get. But when you're thinking about how you can use copy and how you can use headlines, these are some of the guidelines. And there's a great tool, Headline Hacks from John Morrow from Boost Blog Traffic, that I recommend to everybody as well. He gets into a lot more detail on this one, but it's one area that if you're trying to make some serious changes without doing an entire design overhaul or doing a lot of development aspects and things like that, chances are you're going to be doing something with copy and with content. And this is a great way to start and a great place to start. And if we flip ahead, I'm not sure that I would say that the headline that we're using here with the control and the SIMS test here is the worst thing in the world. I mean, join the fun, sign up now already, member. It is very generic and boring, but in this instance, because there are about 18 other different elements on that page competing for your attention, this is not the worst control. So here's an example of a multivariate test that our friends over at Wider Funnel, Chris Goward and the crew ran with the SIMS. And while we don't have time to get into all 6 variants and the details of the test, this is one where they were really looking to drill down on which type of content and copy in that space, in that upper left-hand side, was going to get the most registrations and pull people deeper into the game and into the sales funnel. So if you look at variant 5, and again, this is a much bigger test. The link to it is on the Backlinko post as well as the source here, so you can look it up. It's a great case study. In fact, if you're not familiar with wider funnel, Chris and the crew do a great job with their case studies. You can learn a lot over there. This one here, what we're really highlighting and what really came through in this test was when you use that space in a way that puts what's most important to the different, the different types of audiences, and with a big audience and splitting out 5 different variants, there's a lot of things that you can uncover. You'll see that fun was not even really on the list at all. And signing up now as a call to action is definitely not as compelling as registering now free. You'll see 6 different variations of free in all caps in there. Register your game, get a free Newtown now, get free Riverview, et cetera, et cetera. 4 different diamonds, double downs. We're running with house money. But the point of this one is what you're doing when you use clear copy that goes beyond just join the fun and sign up now, and tells you a lot more about what's behind that sign up. So what's behind door number 1, or variant number 5 in this instance, is going to get a major gain. And I think the increase on this one was 128% more registrants. All of the different variants that they tested improved upon the control. This one was the winner out of the 5 tests, and the 128% gain in signups shows just how powerful it is when you use those concepts of compelling specificity and really laying out what it is you're going to do. So again, without digging into more details on that one, the full case study you can find at Wider Funnel and dig into some of those details. And I think the takeaway here is that, what we're really looking at for gripping and no nonsense, going back to this Optimizely example, is just speak to people directly. So I'm not going to say that this is my favorite headline of all time, but I do like the fact that, again, as Brian mentioned, it is 5 words. It cuts right to the chase. And instead of being so feature-driven, it's kind of a soft benefit in a way. It doesn't talk about the gains that you're going to get. It doesn't talk about, tripling your conversion rate or something like that in terms of specificity, but it's a broader, it talks to a broader concern in users' mind, which is, am I actually going to keep using this after the free trial runs out, right? And that's one of the things I like about it. So I don't have numbers for you on this Optimizely example. It's one that, again, really cuts to the chase, and everything is worth testing. But if you're looking for an idea or a guide on how to sort of get that language in a very concise, packed way that puts those benefits there without getting into sort of longer mission statements and those kinds of things, this is a great example. All right. How are we doing on time, by the way? Are we...
We're doing good. I think it's time for Q&A.
Boom. All right.
Pop them in.
Let's do some Q&A, everybody. And like I mentioned, as we are running pretty good on time right now. We've got a few minutes left here. Yep. And, as mentioned, if you have not followed us on Twitter or had a chance to do some CRO day tweeting because you've been caught up in all this amazing content and some of these great examples that we've been throwing out fast and furious for you, feel free to take a minute to do a tweet or 2 of those. After this, we'll be wrapping up and figuring out who those couple people are for the free evaluation and stuff like that. And right now, we're going to try and dig into some of these questions. So let's take a look.
Okay, so Michael has a question, and he says, Brian Hunter, how do you recommend testing with smaller sample sizes? Most new blogs do not have the traffic to create a statistically relevant sample size and could be making decisions based on incorrect data. I can take this one if you want, but Hunter, it's up to you.
I have thoughts on it, but you can kick it off, and I'll throw mine because I'm kind of a black sheep here.
Okay, great question, Michael, first of all. My take is don't do split testing. If you don't have the sample size where it makes sense, it's not something to focus on. When you're first starting a new blog, your focus should be getting traffic and getting emails. And the time you spend split testing is time you're taking away from the most important things you could be doing, which is writing great stuff, promoting your stuff, guest posting, getting emails, building relationships with other bloggers. Split testing should be one of the last things you do as you build a blog, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I have to agree completely. So, and this, I'm sort of caught in the middle on this one because a lot of friends in the conversion space, you know, and Derek Halper mentioned this in a comment, you know, you shouldn't be testing, suggested doing exactly what Brian was talking about, building your audience first and worrying about sample sizes later. You know, it caused a little bit, kicked up some dust there, but the first website that I ever redesigned, which was quite a long time ago, and it was before we had all the CRO tools and testing tools that are in place today. I mean, I was using web trends to analyze the traffic. Google wasn't even there, for Christ's sake. So that test redesign tripled the traffic and it doubled the sales leads, right? So this is why I'm sort of, I guess, maybe a black sheep in this category. A lot of times we look at testing as a very rigorous scientific thing, and that's great. With all the tools and the processes that we have today, I have no problem with that, but so many sites and products and services and companies that, you know, that don't have a huge traffic base, that are trying to sort of get started and want to know how they can do those types of tests or maybe get those increases. If you have a small sample size, just focus on testing things based on keeping your user in mind. That's where all the things we went over about talking with your customers, putting them first, and using that user-focused and user-centric approach to design really comes into play. If you don't have a sample size that's big enough for running 98% statistical significance on, you know, a 20,000 visitor test audience, then make the changes you have, because you're going to redesign your site at some point anyway, right? So if you're not worried about kind of getting to that level of test significance, it'll free you to do a lot more things. And some may work and some may not, but that's really, I mean, that's going to happen with testing anyway. So all the tools in the world and all the great ideas, you know, you're still going to run some tests that don't work. So don't freeze yourself into that, you know, status quo by thinking that you need to get those certain amounts. Try and do what you can, you know, just try and take those steps and build that audience, and that'll get you there.
Great.
I love that question.
So it's a great question. So Jamie says, thanks for the great webinar, all the amazing tips. It'll be great to go through them at my own pace this evening. Sounds good, Jamie. I don't know if we'll have the recording ready for this evening, but we'll get it as soon as we can. So next question is from Claudine, who asks, with directional cues, an issue is integrating them into responsive sites. How do you use directional cues with responsive sites? Great question, Claudine. It's basically a technical issue, and sometimes you may even have to just remove the directional cue from certain devices. So what I've seen some people do is, you know, if they're using a smartphone, they'll remove the element from the page. And the good way to test this actually is to just take a browser and just make it smaller, and the responsive design will adapt to that. And if the directional cue is just like taking up a huge amount of the screen and kind of obscuring the other stuff, I would consider just getting rid of it, because a lot of times mobile doesn't convert so great. Despite the directional cue, in that case, it wouldn't probably help. So that's my take, is that I look at desktop and tablets as like pretty much the same story. So for them, you can definitely have enough real estate for directional cues. But with responsive sites, and you're talking about smartphones, that's where you may have to sacrifice and just get rid of them if you're using something like a giant arrow.
Mm-hmm. And there's a really, that's a great point. I agree with Brian completely. You know, the version that we saw, the variation that Salesforce was using with kind of the subtle notch, those, you know, those are a way to really employ the tactic without getting into too much trouble with responsive. In fact, even the sign up that we use, the Unbounds page for this webinar, have one of those same notches in it as well. So if the bigger kind of responsive ones, like the crazy long carrot top arms and T-Rex arms, are not going to fly on both environments, try and start small with those responsive ones that fit, and then maybe try and work up from there if you need some more time to develop different variations.
Good. I'm with you. So Malka has a great question. How do you recommend using the exact language customers use when writing for an international audience? That's a great question, Malka. Believe it or not, but my blog and my product people have visited from obviously almost every country in the world, and in terms of purchasing, 50+ countries, including countries where English isn't necessarily a huge presence like China and Japan. So I think that the answer to that question is that your copy, whether you're writing for just people in the States or international, it should almost be the same, because your copy should be so easy and simple to understand that anyone gets it. Even if English is their fourth language, they should still be able to understand it. So I don't think it should change your approach that much, actually, because I'm a huge believer in super dead simple second grade level reading type of copy, and that definitely applies to people who speak English as a second or third language.
If there's anything else, follow us on Twitter. Try and hit us up. We'd love to keep in touch, do another session for you. And I want to thank everybody. You guys have been great. We got a lot of love in the comments and questions today. And Brian, you did a hell of a job. Great post. It's just been a lot of fun.
Dude, it was great, Hunter. Thanks for bringing all your sage wisdom for us today.
You guys can join us in the CRO Castle for beer. A virtual beer in the CRO Castle.
Okay, guys. See you later. Thanks for coming.